All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Huggins. I'm a film studies graduate from the University of Nebraska, and I, for one, love giant monsters. And that's why today we're here to celebrate the two greatest titans of cinema, God's King Kong and Godzilla. Quick question: do you guys see the whole screen, or do you just see the program itself? Because all I'm getting from the actual stream itself is the program. It's not loading up. Bear with me for just a brief moment. Check test 1, 2. All right. I'm still not seeing it on the other end. Here, everybody that's working in the back room, can we get some technical difficulties while I figure this out? Only the program window. That's unfortunate. Please bear with me while I go ahead and figure this out. I hadn't anticipated this. We'll go ahead and please bear with me. Thanks for bearing with me, guys. Sorry, it's my first time for streaming. You can give me a little bit of patience. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. I'll tell you what. I'm just going to go through the panels as is. You guys are probably only going to see on this side of the actual program itself, but we're going to make do with what we got. I appreciate you guys bearing with me. So, once again, this is Godzilla vs. Kong Stravaganza. This is a panel, kind of a new version of a panel that I have been doing for a couple of years. I love to talk about giant monsters, especially Godzilla. And given the film that's coming now next year, which is a new version, a new spin on Godzilla versus Kong, I thought it would be worth it to revisit not just Godzilla, but also the history of Kong and see the interesting ways that these two franchises intertwine. So, once again, you're probably not going to see all the fancy little animations and transitions, but we're still going to have all the same information. So, if you bear with me, we'll go ahead and maybe learn a little bit of something about giant monster history. So, what exactly are we going to do in this panel? What is our objective? So, like I said, we're going to go ahead and explore these two different franchises, all the way from 1933 over to 2021. We're going to go over all of the films for both Godzilla and King Kong, and we're going to pick out the ones that are best for newcomers if you've never really found the time or, been interested in giant monsters. Where would be a good place to start? And we're also going to talk about good trivia. So if you've seen our panel or my panel in the past, welcome back. There's new stuff for you if you don't know too much about Kong. And if you're a newcomer, welcome. Hopefully, I'll make this a good opening point for celebrating giant monster films. So, we're going to go ahead and start at the very beginning. 1933's King Kong. Not the first monster film or giant monster film, but probably the one that popularized it the most. So, what you're going to see here, we're going to go over the rough plot details or other information. We're going to show the main monster and with a little bit of information and just some trivia. Um, for instance, the first King Kong film were inspired by adventure stories by Arthur Conan Doyle and other jungle adventure films. It's about a film crew that goes to a uncharted island called Skull Island, and a woman on the crew is kidnapped by the natives and sacrificed to their god Kong. And of course, the film crew discover this and they take Kong back to New York to make a lot of money because, that's a good idea, right, guys? Um, of course, this utilized stop motion animation and scale models combined with live action footage. King Kong really sold the idea of a giant monster adventure to people in the 1930s. They were just mesmerized by it. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that was cut from the film, including a famous spider pit sequence that depicted the crew being devoured by giant invertebrates. And we'll get back to later. And if you guys see right down here this recognizable Nintendo character, this is the legally distinct Donkey Kong, which of course RKO tried to RKO, the distributor of King Kong, tried to sue Nintendo in the 90s once Donkey Kong got popular. So if you see a Kong with a thumbs up, that means that this is a good Kong film to recommend if you've never seen any others. So of this new film, it introduces a lot of giant monsters. On the Kong films, we're not going to go over all of them because ultimately there's way too many to count. I mean, we obviously have Kong, a lot of different dinosaurs like the T-Rex and the Stegosaurus. It's kind of hard to see on stream on the right, but it's a strange two-legged creature, almost like a snake with two legs and a great big maw. We're going to come back to that creature later, so fold that away in your memory. Now, up next, right after the 1933 King Kong, is 1933's Son of Kong. Now, Son of Kong is a direct sequel to the 1930s film. It's about Carl Denham from the previous film who had run the expedition, who was disgraced and penniless in the aftermath of Kong's escape in New York City. Ultimately having a giant monster or bringing a giant monster to New York City where it runs around and causes all sorts of damage generally ruins you. And so Carl Denham was cast out from New York City, catches a boat. He manages to find himself back to Skull Island, and they discover that there was a little Kong, a son of Kong, if you will. And this was made in the same year as King Kong on about half the budget, reused a lot of sets, many returning characters, especially armatures, because this new Kong was such a big deal. They wanted to get a sequel out as soon as they could. And just like the last film, it's set on Skull Island, and there's a lot of various different monsters. I mean, there's Little Kong, who's like King Kong, except he does a lot less killing, and he's definitely cuter. And if you see around here, there's a Styracosaur, which never made it into the original film. There's a giant bear, which is cool because there's not a lot of kaiju that are bears. So that's kind of a neat little iteration that you only see on this version, as well as like the strange sea serpent. In these films, they love to just add a giant snake in and call it good. Now, we're going to go ahead and leap about 20 years later to Godzilla, King of the Monsters, also known as Gojira. Now, of course, this was the original Godzilla film that was inspired by post-World or the World War II atomic bombings and continued post-World War II atomic tests in 1954, just before this film came out. And it was about a giant creature which is awakened by atomic testing during a post-war Japan, and where they're kind of struggling to fend it off. Of course, this film was a wildly huge success for Toho Studios, and this was definitely not the first film that came over to the States, but it's one of the most popular Japanese films when they re-released it in America in 1956 under the name Godzilla, King of the Monsters, where they went ahead and edited in Raymond Burr to play a new character to kind of bridge the gap between the Americans who were watching the film and, the primarily main Japanese cast. But of course, this film launched the career of Eiji Tsuburaya, who was the driving force behind tokusatsu, also known as the Japanese special effect genre. And as you see down here, we've got Thumbs Up Goji. He was from a Snickers commercial. And of course, just like with the legally distinct thumbs up Donkey Kong, whenever you see this happy Snickers Goji, you should definitely watch this movie if you haven't. And so, with this film only introduced one new kaiju, the titular Godzilla. Enough said. Moving on. So up next we have Godzilla Raids Again, which was initially released in 1955, but the US wouldn't see it until 1959. And this is the first Godzilla sequel and the birth of the Versus series, because it is about Godzilla coming back and fighting a brand new kaiju who we'll get to in a second. And when they released this, they released it as Gigantus the Fire Monster. So it was no longer a sequel to Godzilla in the States, it was just similar. And it's a pretty simple sequel. I wouldn't recommend it too much. The new kaiju that we have for this film is Anguirus. Anguillus, there's like hundreds different of ways of saying this guy's name, but I just say Anguirus, who is of course the first antagonist to Godzilla, but would later become one of Godzilla's well-known pals. Right after this, here we go. King Kong versus Godzilla, the first crossing point between our Kong franchise and our Godzilla franchise. So, of course, just like you would say, it was the first big Godzilla crossover, and I mean also the first big Kong crossover. There have been a few different attempts, but this is the first one to make it on screen, and it's the first color Godzilla film, and I also believe it would be the first color Kong film. But of the Godzilla's franchise, it had the highest box office attendance of just about any of them, adjusted for inflation. Of course, you'll still get people who claim that there's an urban legend surrounding the film, that there's a Japanese version where Godzilla wins and an American version where Kong wins. That's unfortunately, an urban legend. In all of them, Kong is implied to win. But hey, regardless, you should definitely watch this film. It's a great Kong film. It's a great Godzilla film. Definitely check it out. Now, the new kaiju that they have, of course, this is the first version of Kong in this film. And they also have a giant octopus. So here we're just having the new kaiju because we already know Godzilla. While I'm on the topic, you're probably going to notice me going between two different versions of Kong. I say Kong or King Kong. What's the real name? You can say Kong, but some films, they really push the king in King Kong, because when you have the rights to the film King Kong, they want you to know it's King Kong. But nowadays, you can say Kong, and you can pretty much use the character because it's now out of the public domain. Some of the King Kong rights stuff is interesting, but we'll get into that later. Now, up next in 1964, it's Mothra versus Godzilla. This was another big crossover event for the Toho Pictures, and in the States, it was released as Godzilla versus the Thing, like a mystery that nobody knew because, there was this giant egg that washed up on the shore. Nobody knew what was in it. Well, Mothra was in it. But you should watch this one because it is really, really good. Of course, as such, it has a Snickers Godzilla. But yeah, watch this one. Even for 1962, it still really holds up. Like, this movie rocks. Now, of course, the new kaiju in this film is just Mothra. Mothra, who appears in an imago form, which is the butterfly form, to put it colloquially, as well as a form of an egg and in larval form. The cute little kind of caterpillar-looking creatures. After that, we have Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, in 1964. And this was the first film to introduce King Ghidorah, the iconic rival to the franchise, as well as injecting Rodan into the film as well, who had a 1956 film after Godzilla. But this film was the first one for Godzilla to kind of change into a hero. The films are a little bit more lighthearted, especially because the adults who went to see the original Godzilla had kids in between where they are now. So they kind of want to bring in a lot of those younger viewers, and you're going to see that continue throughout this series. And of course, for this film, we have two new kaiju, new in quotations, Rodan and Ghidorah, also known as Ghidra, depending on who you ask. After that, we have Invasion of Astro Monster in 1965. This was the first Godzilla film to introduce aliens as an antagonist in the series, which would later become a staple of the actual series itself. Um, what's weird is that this movie has the least amount of Godzilla footage in a Godzilla film. Like only about 20 minutes of its runtime actually uses, Godzilla. There are no other new kaiju, just Godzilla, Ghidorah, Rodan. But this is still a really good one. Like it's really fun. It kind of ups the sci-fi ante. I would definitely suggest watching this film as well. After which, and you're starting to see that they're making these movies year by year, reusing a lot of the sets, a lot of the monster costumes, a lot of the monsters themselves. So this is 1966's Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. And this film is about Godzilla and Mothra taking on a criminal syndicate called the Red Bamboo on a deserted island who are using their secret weapon, the shrimp kaiju Ebirah. Fun fact, this story was originally written for Kong, and you can see some of that characterization in the actual film. It was going to be Operation Robinson Crusoe, King Kong versus Ebirah. I don't know why that never really panned out, but we will see another Kong film done by Toho coming up here in just a moment. But of course, we got to go over the new kaiju. This film had Ebirah, which is of course a giant shrimp, lives in the water where that's its natural habitat, and it's very formidable there. Of course, there is a random giant condor, not named, shows up in one scene. Godzilla smacks it out of the sky, and it's there. But honestly, these obscure kaiju like the giant condor, they're our favorites, right? Right? Anyways, up next, King Kong Escapes, 1967, to see where Toho is using that Kong license. Now, interestingly enough, the plot is loosely based on the Rankin Bass cartoon, The King Kong Show. It's about a evil genius kidnapping King Kong and using a robot version called Mechani-Kong to control him and force Kong to harvest this rare radioactive material, or mineral, that they'll use to take over the world. Simple enough. In this version, it's Kong versus Mechani-Kong, and at the end, it is a climactic fight between the two of them on Tokyo Tower, kind of like how we associate Kong with the Empire State Building. This one, they wanted to change it to Tokyo Tower, which is a very cool detail. These films still like to weave in a little bit of Kong mythos, so I really appreciate that. And of course, this gets a Kong thumbs up, so you gotta see it. This one had a lot of new kaiju, of course. It's a new version of King Kong. We have this kind of T-Rex-like thing to stand in for all the dinosaurs in the older Kong films called Gorosaurus. We also have Mechani-Kong, which I told you about. And of course, once again, a giant random sea serpent, a big old snake. You don't know what to throw in there? Just throw in a snake. It works. Now we go up to 1967, which is Son of Godzilla. So this was the first film to have any offspring of Godzilla, which is a theme that we're going to see running throughout all the films. And this was fairly lighthearted, of course. It's about Godzilla and his dopey-looking son. But it's a lot of fun. I really wouldn't recommend this if it's your first time to Godzilla films, but this movie does have a lot of heart. Of course, the new kaiju we have for this film, we have Kamacuras, which is this giant praying mantis, Kumonga, which is of course a giant spider, and then Manila or Minya, however you prefer to say him, who is like Godzilla got crossed with, the little biscuit guy, the You poke his tummy, and he goes, woohoo! Forgot his name, but you see him. He's a dopey looking little boy, but he is also kind of cute. Let's be honest. Anyways, after that, we get to Destroy All Monsters, which is a title I'm sure some of you will recognize. Now, Destroy All Monsters was a film that's about, like, hey, all of the popular Toho kaiju that they could bring out of the shed where they were storing their suits, they're all going to get together for one big brawl. It's the Avengers of the 1960s Toho films. It was one of the first to feature an international location or for all these monsters outside of Japan, and of course was the namesake for the Godzilla fighting game on the GameCube and Xbox. Let me know in chat if you guys have played this game because I played the heck out of it, or its sequel on the PS2. So let me know if you enjoyed that game. Now, this film didn't technically have any new, by definition, kaiju, but they brought into the Godzilla series kaiju that have appeared in other Toho films outside it, like Gorosaurus from King Kong Escapes, Manda from a film called Atragon, Baragon showed up in a film, I think it was The Mysterians, and Varan, who showed up in his own film called Varan the Unbelievable. Could you believe it? I don't think I could. Anyways, sorry, I think I skipped here. After that, we go to 1969's All Monsters Attack, also known as Godzilla's Revenge, even though neither of the titles make sense for what film this is, because this is one of the few Godzilla movies that takes place entirely in the imagination, specifically of a child, as they're dealing with bullies. He imprints on the little Manila, who becomes his friends. Some people consider this to be one of the worst films in the series, although recently I've seen a lot of people change their opinions of it. If you have seen this film and you enjoy it, let us know in chat. I don't know too much about this film, but it definitely seems like it's getting more of an audience nowadays. And of course, the only new kaiju we have here is Gabara, who's almost like this toad-like demon creature who is the big bully character of the film, where the boy is uh, projecting his feelings of his bullies onto this new kaiju. So he technically doesn't exist in canon, just in the imagination of a child. Now, after that, we took a break for a couple of years to come up with something new. These Godzilla movies have been going on for a while, but director Yoshimitsu Banno was bringing the film into another direction, which is about pollution, namely Godzilla vs. Hedorah. So this is a trippy, eco-friendly Godzilla film pitting the big G up against a creature made of pollution and sludge. The director of the film, like I said, Yoshimitsu Banno, was fired from this role because this is a really weird movie. It doesn't really fit in with the others, and Toho didn't really like it. But later on, the director returning to the Godzilla film would later inspire the new American movies that we're seeing, in 2014 and in 2019. But we'll get to those ones later. And of course, this is the first film in which Godzilla can fly by curling up his tail, launching at the ground with his atomic breath, and flying off into the sky. It really is, a monumental moment. Okay. So the only new kaiju in versus Hedorah is, of course, Hedorah, who starts off in different forms. Starts off as like this kind of weird tar-like tadpole, and kind of gains a swimming form, like almost the size of like a VW Beetle. It later has a flying form that resembles a UFO, some sort of squat crawling form, which is big enough to suck the smog right out of a factory. And then, of course, a giant standing form, for duking it out with Godzilla, shooting various lasers out of its eyes. Hedorah is definitely one of the most iconic Godzilla antagonists, and personally, my favorite. All right. So after that, it brings us to 1972's Godzilla vs. Gigan, another fan favorite. This film is about alien cockroaches who impersonate theme park staff where they're making a giant Godzilla replica, instead creating a weapon with the Godzilla Tower to destroy humanity and take over Earth. Of course, this film features Gigan, who teams up with the other iconic villain, King Ghidorah, or at least at this time Ghidorah, who also will become an iconic Godzilla rival. I I can't confirm this. I think before this film, the AJ Subaraya, who we talked about before, had passed away, and this is the first time that the Godzilla kaiju would bleed, or it's definitely more graphic. I think Subaraya was against that, so when he was out of the picture, Toho did what they wanted to do. But again, I might be unfounded. And correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. Now, of course, the only new kaiju in this film is Gigan, who is a large, almost chicken-like creature, which is a cyborg from the Space Hunter Nebula M. Great big claws and a buzzsaw running through his belly. It's a really creative design. And of course, after that, Godzilla vs Megalon. Now this movie, this is definitely a fun one. A lot of people consider this film to be the low point of the Godzilla franchise. Of course, if you don't like fun, it's your problem. This it had a new mecha character called Jet Jaguar, who was actually designed, or maybe not designed, but was uh, a child came up with it and used for a it was a sort of campaign, like a contest for to create the new Godzilla character, originally titled Red Alone. And this is one of the few movies that you might have seen on Mystery Science Theater 3000. And of course, I would definitely give this a good Godzilla thumbs up. This is a lot of fun, especially if you're with your friends, get a couple of drinks, climb around the TV, watch the original one or the Mystery Science Theater 3000 one. You'll have a good time regardless. And it looks like we got some love for Jet Jaguar in the chat. I like where you guys are going. Anyways, of course, the new kaiju are Megalon, who is a giant beetle creature that comes from Seatopia, and Jet Jaguar, who is a, almost kind of a Power Ranger Super Sentai like giant robot. These guys are definitely fan favorites. Now, after that, we kind of start to take a tonal shift. This is Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. Now, this was the first film to feature Godzilla antagonist Mechagodzilla. And just like the last one, or at least Godzilla versus Gigan, it starts to become a little bit more graphic. But you should definitely see this one because it really is a great example of the 70s science fiction Godzilla film. So, highly recommended from me. All right, so the new kaiju we have here, both Mechagodzilla, enough said, a robotic Godzilla from space controlled by giant apes. You guys know the deal. But also King Caesar. King Caesar is based off of a mythical creature called a Shisa, which is a large lion dog. Like you see them in, in Chinese and Japanese statues. That's where he's coming from. It's a mythical creature. And then after that, we have Terror of Mechagodzilla in 1975. This film would be the last of the Showa era, which is the very first era of Godzilla, lasts about 20 years. This was the final film directed by the original director Ishiro Honda, and it's kind of a return to a darker plot, despite it being still a versus film. I would definitely give this a thumbs up. It's another good send-off for Mechagodzilla, as well as has another interesting kaiju, Titanosaurus, who is another kind of sea-based kaiju, almost kind of comparable to Godzilla in some ways. All right. And so, as we end the Showa era of Godzilla, we enter the first remake of King Kong, 1976's King Kong. Let me know if you guys have seen this movie in chat. So this one is a kind of a loose remake of the original Kong film. They replaced the adventuring and filmmaking aspect with a company that is surveying for oil on this uncharted island. But of course, they discover instead Kong, who takes one of the women from the voyage and imprints on her, and they use that to bring him back over to the States to capitalize off of him. Interestingly enough, this was one of two planned remakes of King Kong at the time because this was the 70s. People were starting to feel nostalgic for that film that came out about 30 or 40 years ago. So both Universal and Paramount tried to remake the film. They both went into production at the same time. Paramount got their. I'm actually going to go back to the last screen for a moment. The image on the left, the King Kong, was created as an iconic poster to get everybody hyped up for that a year in advance. And so Universal said, hey, you can't do that. We have the rights as well. And between a legal battle, Paramount was allowed to make their remake, but they gave the rights to the remake to Universal afterwards, which is going to lead to 2005's King Kong remake. But once again, we'll cover that there. We got a lot of ground to cover. New kaiju, of course, a new version of King Kong who, just like the last Japanese ones, is a man in a suit this time. He's not an armature with stop motion. But of course, like we said before, if you need another giant monster to throw in there, throw in a random giant snake. Nobody's going to care if there's only two giant monsters in this film as long as you've got one more. And so after that, we go to the next series of Godzilla films, what's called the Showa era. I'm sorry, not the Showa era, but the Heisei era. This is going to be a new series of Godzilla films that kind of disregards the most of the Showa era except for the very first Godzilla film in 1954. Now, uh, Return of Godzilla is, like I said, a new continuity. It's definitely a much darker film because they wanted to try to evoke some of the feelings from the beginning. And of course, instead of nuclear testing, this is about the Cold War and the ramping up of tensions from between America and Russia, the Soviet Union, with Japan caught in the middle. Now, one thing that's cool about this film is that they had a guy in a suit, a suit performer, but they also wanted to create a giant 18-foot animatronic Godzilla called a Cybot. There's not a lot of footage of that in the film because it didn't really work the way that they wanted to, but still, it's super interesting. In fact, we're going to see that. This film didn't have any new kaiju, but it did have some cool stuff. The Shakirus, which are these giant gnats that drank on Godzilla's blood and thus became significantly larger. We have a military weapon called the Super X, which is almost kind of like a a UFO that flies through the air and it's made to dispatch against Godzilla. And of course, on the right, you see this huge Godzilla animatronic. It's still very impressive if you see it at that scale. And since then, they've of course taken off all that skin. So I'll tell you, it is very nightmarish just seeing the innards of that animatronic. It's definitely a Five Nights of Freddy's thing if you're into that. Super scary. Now, after that, we come to Godzilla vs. Biollante. Now, before we move forward, I want to point something out. Now I'm using these nice posters, at least the left version, which is the Japanese one, who were created by an artist, and I'm probably butchering their name, I forgot it, but it's Noriyuki Orai, who actually just passed away in the last 2 or 3 years. Um, he's doing the art of these posters as well as a lot of other Japanese science fiction films. So if you see these excellent, almost kind of like paintings for posters, just think about that. They are really cool and they definitely help define this era. Now, Godzilla vs. Biollante begins the Versus series of the Heisei era and is the debut of Biollante, who is another really fan favorite for only having showed up in one film. Um, this movie was actually already created or was created for Toho by a dentist when they opened up a story contest to make the new Godzilla film. Another film was a winner, but that runner-up became a different Toho science film, took out Godzilla, and then I do not remember what it was called, but they like to do a lot of these different contests to really engage viewers and see what they want. Of course, Godzilla vs. Biollante is very difficult to get legally in the West due to licensing issues. I think HBO owns the rights to Godzilla vs. Biollante, but is not doing anything about it. But hey, you can watch this movie. It's really good, like one of the best in the series. Of course, this film is the introduction to Biollante, who shows up in two different forms. Her rose form, which of course was created from splicing Godzilla DNA, human DNA, and the DNA of a rose, and then it mutates to become a much scarier final form with the great big, almost like crocodilian maw. Now, after that, we have King Kong Lives, pitting back to the Kong franchise. You'll recognize the Noriyuki Orai painting on the right here for that release. And in this film, it's about the Kong from the last remake having actually survived. He climbed up the World Trade Center, was shot down, but it turns out he survived and was placed in a coma. 10 years later, on another island, a female one of Kong's species is discovered. They bring her over to the States, and they use a plasma transfusion to bring the male Kong back. And of course, this is the only sequel to that film. It's not that great. I mean, it's kind of fun if you really love, apes like cooing and like, making googly eyes at each other across the pasture, then maybe this is your film. But I don't know if this would resonate well in the total Kong franchise. But like we said, this has some new Kongs, female Kong and a baby Kong, if you love cute apes. And then we're going to go back to the Godzilla franchise through the rest of the Heisei era with Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in 1991. Now, this is the film that introduces time travel into the Godzilla canon and offers a new origin for this Godzilla, as well as the new King Ghidorah, having been upgraded from regular Ghidorah in the last series. It also is, this film itself is heavily inspired from the Terminator, which the T2 actually premiered that year. And they have their own Terminator character, an android called M11. Now, with the new kaiju in this film, they have this thing called the Godzillasaurus, which was supposed to be one of the first version of Godzilla before he mutated. We also have these creatures called Dorats, which are like these almost little pets from the future that are left in Godzilla's stead and then become mutated, which become King Ghidorah. And then from the future, the body of King Ghidorah is used to create Mecha King Ghidorah, which is, that much more cooler. Add a mecha in front of anything else, and it does become at least 75% cooler. Can't argue with me on that. Now, after that, 1992, year I was born, with Godzilla versus Mothra, or Godzilla and Mothra Battle for Earth. Now, this was the highest grossing Godzilla film at the time because we don't think of Mothra. Well, Mothra is kind of popular here in the States, but Mothra is super popular in Japan. So this was Mothra's first time, coming back in theaters since the 60s or the 70s. Now, the actual suit that they had originally used was stolen from the set and was found washed up in Tokyo Bay. So you kind of wonder what was going on there. Did somebody take the suit for a joyride and go to a little bit of Godzilla skinny dipping? I don't know. It's one of those things I would like to know, but it's unfortunate the suit was ruined. Now, the special effects director had originally intended Mothra to die and become a cyborg at the end of the film. That doesn't actually happen, but I just wanted to include that because a mecha Mothra, are you kidding me? That's super cool. But the only other kaiju that we have in this film is Batra, which, just like Mothra, has a larval form and an imago form. After that, continuing to the Heisei era, is Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 in 93. And this brings back Showa classics Mechagodzilla and Rodan, the former of which are tied back directly to Mecha King Ghidorah and versus King Ghidorah to create the futuristic Mechagodzilla. And this film was the first one of a trilogy to feature a new form of Godzilla's offspring, which we'll cover here. The new kaiju we have are Fire Rodan, a version of Rodan that's bright red and can shoot a plasma beam straight out of its mouth. Mechagodzilla, as well as Super Mechagodzilla, which has a another kind of like a jet or a Super X-like vehicle that attaches to its back and can fire maser rays, as well as Baby Godzilla. This one is definitely less dopier and significantly cuter. I think this one resonates with audiences more than Manila, unless you somehow happen to be a Manila mega fan like me. And then after that, we have Godzilla versus Space Godzilla in 1994. This film is decisive amongst fans. Some people really like its goofy plot. Some people don't really like it. It's all right with me. Definitely not a recommended point, but it is kind of a lighthearted film. And the creature Space Godzilla also has an origin that ties into both Godzilla versus Biollante and Godzilla versus Mothra. So there's kind of a little bit of unique lore going on there. But the new kaiju that we have is, of course, Space Godzilla, who is a version of Godzilla created when Godzilla's cells went into space, came back all crystally and extra mean with telekinesis. After that, they have Mogura, which is actually a new version of an old mecha from a Toho movie in the 60s called The Mysterians. And of course, Little Godzilla. Now you can tell here that this was the first time that like super deformed characters or chibi characters started becoming super popular in Japan. So they kind of lean into that for the appearance of Little Godzilla, to market them, make money, sell a bunch of little Godzilla finger puppets. It's super cute, and I'd like to have some finger puppets like that. Anyways, moving on to Godzilla versus Destoroyah in 1995. Now, this is the last film of the Heisei era, and they really wanted you to know that. This was a movie about Godzilla that's reaching a nuclear meltdown, which threatens to destroy the world, as well as a brand new antagonist that was created from the death of the original 1954 Godzilla called Destoroyah. And after this film was created, Toho had this huge, like a great big funeral for Godzilla, a traditional funeral, as publicity. Again, they wanted to let you know that this was the last Godzilla movie that they were doing for a while, in quotations or parentheses. But this one gives a thumbs up. I would definitely watch this one. It's very dramatic, super cool. The look of Godzilla is really awesome. Instead of the charcoal gray, he's more of a straight black with these crazy, red, fiery red magma patches, and is constantly emitting steam. A really unique look for Godzilla in the series. But the new kaiju that we have in this film is Destoroyah, which has a flying form, an aggregate, which is kind of like this crab-like walker form, and its final form, which looks like a cross between a Final Fantasy end boss and the biblical Satan, as well as Godzilla Jr., who is the adult form of Little Godzilla, Baby Godzilla, who will then take the reins as the next big Godzilla. So, with that said, this is the end of the Heisei era, and let's just say, I think I know a few of you know which movie's coming up next. That would be, of course, the 1998 Godzilla film. So, this was a remake of the original Godzilla film, a loose remake that was originally started in 1994 by the director of Speed, Jan de Bont, who wanted to try to remake and create a new Godzilla series. His write-up didn't get funded because they thought it was going to be too expensive. So Paramount Pictures they gave the movie over to Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, who had then made Independence Day, which is, of course, a super popular film. Also, forgive me, I spelled Independence wrong. It happens. But this film also had an incredibly high budget, like went over budget so much. And they had this huge marketing campaign to try to get people to, interested in the film. But the film ultimately did not really deliver to casual fans or to hardcore monster fans, and was thus considered one of the greatest box office bombs of the 1990s. The only two things that were successful were an animated spin-off of the film. Tell me in chat if you've seen the Godzilla '98 cartoon, and the soundtrack were the only two things that actually made money for the film. It's a lot more like Jurassic Park than a Godzilla film. And if you've seen this one, you know what I'm talking about. So this one gets a special thumbs down Snickers Goji. So I don't know. This is kind of a condescending Godzilla film. It's made by people, or at least one of the directors, didn't like Godzilla movies, thought they could do it better, and, well, that's the result. It's like watching a train wreck in real time. So for this one, the new kaiju they have is, of course, the new version of Godzilla, who instead is a mutated iguana based off of French nuclear testing in in the Seychelles. I'm not certain, but of course, this new Godzilla can lay eggs and has these little juvenile baby Godzillas that are kind of like the velociraptors from Jurassic Park. And of course, after this film, Toho thought, hey, what the heck? What are you doing with our Godzilla movies? We'll just go ahead and show you how to do one. So with this is Godzilla 2000 Millennium. Starts the new series of Godzilla films, the Millennium Era. Now, this was, it was, like I said, a direct response to the 1998 TriStar film. I'm sorry, I said Paramount earlier, it's TriStar. But this, of course, began another new continuity, retconning every other Godzilla movie besides the original. And it's not the last time we're going to see it here. I think they knew that they wanted to have this movie appeal to Westerners because this was the first one that they made Godzilla green, who is generally considered to be green by a lot of casual fans. But this was the last Godzilla film released theatrically, at least widespread, until the new American Godzilla films. But I give this one a thumbs up. It's pretty fun. The new kaiju we have are Orga, who in a millennium form, which is a weird alien form, and a final form. Now, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to go a little bit quicker because we only got about 15 minutes here. So we have Godzilla versus Megaguirus, which also resets the continuity. Not even Godzilla 2000, but it brings back these creatures called Meganulon, which were in the original Rodan film, and they kind of spruce them up. We have the Meganulon and the Meganula, which are a walking and flying variant of the same kind of creature, as well as Megaguirus, who is this huge, almost insect-like creature. Of course, you have Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all out attack in 2001, taking the prize for the longest Godzilla title by far. You could also call it GMK. This is another retconned film all the way back to the previous continuity, based on evil Godzilla who represents the soldiers that were lost to World War II against Japan. So it's a reminder of Japan's their own flaws and their own mired history in World War II. But King Ghidorah is on the side of good this time, teaming up with Mothra and Baragon. We're going to have other characters, Anguirus and Varan the Unbelievable, but they switched it up in the plot just to make sure they can bring in more people. This gets a good Godzilla thumbs up. This movie rocks. No more questions asked. Go watch this one. After that, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla 2002, the first Godzilla film that I ever owned. Now, this is a reinterpretation of Mechagodzilla, as it was created by using the bones of the Godzilla that had died in 1954 by creating a robot around it. And it's also about the themes of women serving in the Japanese Special Defense Force. Now, this film had a merchandise crossover with Hamtaro, which is awesome because if you've been paying attention to Godzilla news, Hamtaro Godzilla crossover just came back, baby, literally last week. So, bringing it back to the good old days here with the Godzilla Hamtaro crossover. But this gets a Snickers Goji thumbs up. Definitely go see this one. We have Mechagodzilla Kiryu, as well as the appearance of the original Godzilla who had died in Tokyo Bay. And then that film had a sequel, Godzilla Tokyo SOS. This is the only canonical sequel, a sequel to the last one, but it also brings in the Mothra film as canon, and it's a unique take on a Mechagodzilla film from the perspective of a mechanical engineer for Kiryu. So you don't get to see a lot of movies from that perspective. The only new kaiju is Kaomibas, who had showed up in another Toho film in the 60s called Space Amoeba, but he's dead by the time he shows up in this film, so, just covering our bases. Then we have Godzilla Final Wars from 2004. This was going to be the last film of the Millennium series, and it brings back a lot of Showa characters, like over 10 monsters, most of which are from the Showa era, including the 1998 Godzilla as Zilla. But this movie really is like 25% Destroy All Monsters, 50% X-Men, and 300% The Matrix. I know that doesn't add up, but if you don't think so, then you haven't seen this movie, because you will know. You will know. Anyways, the new kaiju we had were Monster X, who becomes Kaiser Ghidorah, a new kind of devilish version of Ghidorah, as well as a new version of Gigan, who is created by the Exilians and has giant chainsaws for hands. Ooh, scary. So, after that, we go back to the Kong franchise. In 2005, Peter Jackson's King Kong. And this is, like I said, Peter Jackson, who directed The Lord of the Rings. This was his second attempt to remake the film. He tried to do so in the 90s, but he didn't really have the same clout he did before Lord of the Rings. But it's almost a direct remake of the 1933 version, taking place in that era. And this version of Kong is entirely CG through motion capture by Andy Serkis, who played Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, and designed by Weta Workshop, who do strictly fantastic work. And so we see here a good old Kong thumbs up. You got to see this Kong movie. It's long. It's going to be a while. It's like 3 hours long, but you got to see it. But of course, this is a new version of Skull Island and plenty of different dinosaurs. We have a new Kong, plenty of different T-Rexes and Velociraptors and giant insects, all sorts of scary stuff. And then we brings us to 2014, the new version of Godzilla. This begins the MonsterVerse, which is a new shared universe under Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures. And this was, like I said, it was a result of Versus Hedorah's director, Yoshimitsu Banno, trying to shop a spectacle film in the States in the 2000s. And then he pitched it to Legendary. They didn't want to do his film, but they said, yeah, let's do a Godzilla film, though. And this one was done in CGI with no suitmation, but has motion capture, just like the last Kong, done by and this Godzilla was designed by Weta Workshop. So Weta Workshop's one of the few people who have designed both a Kong and a Godzilla for two completely separate franchises. This one has new kaiju called the Muto, massive unidentified terrestrial organism, in the form of a male with wings and a much larger female who has multiple legs. And then, keeping it going on, Shin Godzilla. Enough said. This movie rocks. This is one of the best, if not the best, Godzilla film, in my personal opinion. And this one does something none of the other movies do. It reboots everything. Not even the 1954 is in this continuity. It's directed by Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi. Hideaki Anno, who created Evangelion, or at least directed it. Shinji Higuchi, who directed a bunch of giant monster films, including the Gamera 90s films. Also did the live-action Attack on Titan. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but it's puts you in perspective where they're coming from. They had this was the first time that the Japanese production company had done an all CGI Godzilla through motion capture, but they tried to do a giant animatronic just like the Cybot. Also didn't work too well, but this film did receive like about 4 or 5 Japanese Academy Awards for all these different categories because they love this film and I love this film. So it gets 3 Godzilla thumbs up. But the thing with Shin Godzilla is just like Hedorah or Destoroyah, this Godzilla starts up and changes over time. The first form, second form, which is named Kamada-kun. The third form, where he stands up and can walk, is called Shingawa-kun. The fourth form, as you see in the upper right, and of course a mysterious fifth form. I'm not going to spoil it because it's a really great reveal. But after that, bring it up to 2017's Kong Skull Island. This was a prequel to the MonsterVerse. Takes place in the same universe as Godzilla. Originally wasn't going to be for Warner Brothers, but they brought it over to bring it into that universe. And this is a film that is about Kong and really feels like a Kong film, but doesn't take the direct plot. It takes place almost entirely on Skull Island. Kong stays there. He doesn't die at the end. He doesn't go to the World Trade Center or the Empire State Building. So he lives for another day. Thumbs up. I think this is the best movie in the MonsterVerse. That's my personal opinion. Um, of course, the new kaiju we have are Kong and various versions of the monsters of Skull Island. Um, the main antagonist is the Skullcrawler, also known as Ramarak, but also various versions of the Skull Island creatures. Ramarak being the new version of the Skullcrawler from the first film. I pointed him out at the very beginning, almost like a snake with legs. But going through it, we have the Godzilla anime trilogy, which is on Netflix, Godzilla Planet of Monsters, City on the Edge of Battle, Planet Eater. People aren't too fond of this one, so I'm not going to go in too much detail, but it's done by the writer of Madoka Magica and Fate Zero. It's a high concept science fiction film taking place 20,000 years in the future. Has a bunch of new kaiju, servum, which are like these flying Godzilla-like creatures, a Philium, which is an offspring of Godzilla, which is the same size as the 1954 one, and Godzilla Earth, who is over 6 times bigger and the largest Godzilla to date at 300 meters length. City on the Edge of Battle has no new kaiju, but has Mechagodzilla City, Liquid Metal Fortress, and the Vulture. Um, Planet Eater has a new version of Ghidorah, but that's all we can really say for there. Going quickly through Godzilla King of the Monsters, um, it's 2019's MonsterVerse version, and this is a follow-up to both the 2014 Godzilla and Kong Skull Island, and it's a reference to the American release, Godzilla King of the Monsters. Um, Sorry, just finishing up here. We have new versions of Rodan, Mothra, Ghidorah, as well as Behemoth, Scylla, and Methuselah, among some other new titans. Again, they call them titans in this film, but call them kaiju, whatever you want. And just to finish up here, coming soon to theaters near you, or probably not. After that, what's up next? 2021's Godzilla vs. Kong. Everything is leading up to this. You know, it's a big battle. It's going to be the next MonsterVerse film. We don't know. We haven't seen anything from this. Like only a little bit of leaked footage. But we don't know what this film's going to be like. But what we do know is that we've got a new anime. That's right, a new Godzilla anime. Instead of like a bunch of movies like the last trilogy, this is going to be a series that's going to premiere in May or April 2021 called Godzilla Singular Point. Super excited for this one. It is like I really like the look of it. Like a couple weeks ago, we didn't even know if this was going to be a real or fake, but it is going to be a thing. You're going to see it on Netflix. And hurrying this up. Okay, so right now it's about we only got about 4 minutes left. Mods, do you think we got enough time to discuss something for a little bit, or do we need to close things up here? What do you guys think? Sorry, give us a moment to catch up here on chat. Well, we're catching up there. I just want to thank everybody who's helping us get this online event. It sucks that we couldn't have a Nebraska this year. I understand why. But really, our staff is so great because we just want to help engage our friends and make it feel like, hey, there's a little bit of a Nebraska this year. So hey, we got a couple minutes left. I'm not hearing anything from the mods, so let's go over some chats here. Anything that's interesting. It looks like Hamtaro is a there are a lot of Hamtaro fans here in chat, especially with the new Godzilla crossover. It's not something I would have expected. Um, all right. And just to polish it off, since we don't have much time, on this discussion page here, we've got some art by Arthur Adams, who is a comic veteran who did some art for the new Criterion series. On the right here, we have some art from a man named Van Stout. I forgot his first name, but on the top is kind of a rendering of what would King Kong versus Godzilla look like if it was done by the Americans, done in the style of the original Kong film with stop motion. On the bottom, just a nice little picture of Godzilla versus Kong. A lot of great stuff by some comic book artists. And right now we are at 58 minutes into the hour. So I want to thank you guys for sticking around for the panel. I really appreciate it. If you want to hear more about Godzilla stuff for me or just general kaiju stuff, go ahead and follow me at hedoratheblogmonster.tumblr.com. Alternatively, if you want to check me out on Twitter and see my other, see me bitch about science fiction stuff and Godzilla on Twitter, go ahead and follow me at its_al Huggins. Got all my sources from Gojipedia. And once again, thank you guys for attending. Really means a lot to me. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off so we let the next guys take over, but I appreciate for sticking around, and I hope you have a great weekend.